managing editor at Daily Signal, and his new book out. And we were joking about it. I'm like, I got to say this right. The Woketopus, the dark money cabal manipulating the federal government. Tyler O'Neill joins the program. All right, my man. This is like the time, right? Because you've got Doge, the daily, you got the aid stuff. You got the daily insanity of all the crap they're rolling out when it's like, look at this, we're spending $50 million on tampons for monkeys. This is incredible.
Yeah. And there's a lot of overlap between one of the main figures in my book, George Soros, everybody should know. His son, Alex Soros, is running the Open Society Foundations now, and he is one of the big funders behind what I describe as the Woketopus, which is a network. You have the left's dark money network that is propping up all of these woke activist groups that feed their people and their agendas into the federal government, forcing through the administrative bureaucracy things that they couldn't get passed in Congress.
Which is that just not a surprise. I mean, let's be real. You know this as well as I. Everybody's got their pet projects, and if you've got enough money, you can buy enough people to get stuff in, which is it's a sad state of politics, Tyler, and it's frustrating. But I look at this and I see them running around. They're terrified of Elon. They're mad at the messenger, and the message is the thing you should be upset about. You got caught out with your insanity. Yes, I mean, can Elon probably be a bit much? And he should probably, I have feeling some days he's walking around the White House just unabated. But that being said, he is exposing stuff that is ridiculous. What U.S. aid started out to be as soft power and this great idea has been hijacked by 5013C with a bunch of woke ideas.
Yeah. Well, it's been hijacked by the woke priorities. And what you see time and time again is the Open Society Foundations, which is founded by George Soros, funding people across the world, funding these crazy left-wing ideas. And of course, he can fund what he wants to fund. I don't want to prevent him from funding what he wants to fund, but you have the USAID partnering with him, directing your tax dollars to the same things he's funding. And so you get these transgender operas that we're paying for in Colombia, this transgender play in Peru. I mean, it's just and DEI in offices in a foreign country. I'm just like, we are dealing with this problem now and here in the United States, and yet your tax dollars, my tax dollars, are subsidizing sending this woke ideology overseas. And it's this kind of corruption that I set to explain in my book. I've followed the money and I've followed the priorities of the Biden administration, why they were spending all this money, what they were doing. And, you scratch beneath the surface of almost any Biden policy and you'll find a woke activist group that's feeding people into the administration, that's writing executive orders that Biden essentially copies and pastes and then signs, and then bringing people in from that organization to implement those orders in the Biden White House. I mean, it's just the revolving door nature of it. It can be astounding. But of course, those of us who've been following it weren't all that surprised. I mean, after all, does anybody think that Biden was the one calling all of the shots in his past administration?
No, I don't think anybody believes that, Tyler. Talking to Tyler O'Neill, his new book's called The Woketopus, The Dark Money Cabal Manipulating the Federal Government. And, you talk about Soros, and I've always said this, I have a love-hate relationship with George because I was a currency trader for a long time. And when it comes to the currency world, there may have never been anybody as good as that. The other wacky stuff, it drove me crazy. But his son is far more politically active. And he's got unlimited funds, in some ways to do stuff. And it's not just at the federal level. We've seen it with all these woke DAs and these wacky things. Those tentacles and the Woketopus go out a lot of places.
Oh, yeah. No, they really do. And, of course, that's one of the big aspects of George Soros' influence is funding the rogue prosecutor movement, leading to a spike in crime across the country. But, of course, President Biden apparently wasn't paying attention, or maybe he was paying attention, and he decided to give the Presidential Medal of Freedom to George Soros. This is the highest civilian honor, and one of the things Biden did as he was walking out the door was essentially confirm all the research in my book, because my whole premise of the book is that Soros is one of the main people who's propping up this vast influence campaign, and they're working closely they were calling the shots in the Biden administration. And, lo and behold, one of his last acts, Biden essentially says, "Oh yeah, I really appreciated all your contributions, all your funding, all your philanthropy." Read to the activist groups that have been pushing my administration even further to the left. And so, you see this, you see it throughout that administration. If you were paying attention to the news during that time, you'll remember, oh yeah, one woke activist group from a far left NGO gets called in to head the Department of the Interior. And then guess what? Now that Biden is out, she's off to another woke activist group that's focused on climate alarmism. And by the way, she wrote a letter on behalf of tree spiking eco-terrorists, which really raises a question. Why was Biden choosing her to lead the Department of the Interior in the first place? I wonder. Maybe he's being pushed to adopt the most radical ideologies that are holding America back. And in order to divide us, in order to promote, in order to enrich the cronies that some of these very powerful names in his administration had. I mean, you talk about people like John Podesta, who, is notorious. His brother Tony is a big lobbyist who is lobbying on behalf of European LNG companies at the same time as Biden puts a freeze on U.S. exports of LNG. That is going to benefit the very people that Tony Podesta is representing, and John Podesta had his hands all over that LNG pause. So if you scratch the surface in the Biden White House, you'll see these woke activist groups, and then you'll see the influence of George Soros, the influence of the Arabella Advisors network of nonprofits. And these are some of the same people who are also funding the groups supporting the anti-Israel riots on college campuses last year. And we're starting to see them propping up again now. And so thankfully, Trump has issued executive orders saying, like, if you are harassing Jews on college campuses and you're a foreign national at a U.S. university, we're going to get you out of here. And I think that's exactly the message that these people need to hear.
Absolutely. The book is called The Woketopus, The Dark Money Cabal Manipulating the Federal Government. Tyler O'Neill, the author, joins the program. What is the end game? With Soros, what was the end game? What's the end game for Alex? You got to have an end game. And I've often wondered, okay, so what is your end game? Because it's not, you got a lot of these groups that don't agree with each other, even though they may be woke and political, they're not aligned with each other in a lot of other ways outside of being to the left.
Yeah, I don't know for certain. I can't read into Alex Soros's heart and mind to know what his end game is. Sometimes it really seemed as though George Soros just wanted to make the world burn. But I do think that there is a focus on power, there's a focus on money, and there's almost a societal destabilization that these people seem to want. When you're pushing radical ideas like gender ideology, I can believe of some people that maybe they believe this nonsense, but those who are like smart political actors who are, more cynical, which I imagine the Soroses very much are, I think they're funding it because it divides society and it pits us against each other. And it makes us doubt. If you want a gaslighting 101, transgenderism is your one example, because it makes people doubt the very basic truth about humanity, that people are male or female, and that women in women's intimate spaces should be protected from men. The fact is, if you look at the prison data, which one of my old colleagues, Mary Margaret Olahan, did, she got the prison data from Minnesota, and she saw that a whole bunch of these male inmates in women's prisons just happened to have been sex offenders and be convicted of being sex offenders, and now they're being housed with women in women's prisons. And of course you get rapes, because men who are convicted of these things, who are, who claim then to be women but still have their male parts, what are they going to do? They're going to abuse the system. And that's not to say that all people who struggle with transgenderism are a threat, but this policy has so many loopholes that make people vulnerable, that make things unfair. And the only reason I could see you wanting it unless you were brainwashed with gender ideology, is that you want destabilization in our country.
Yeah, which is, because again, I read a lot of stuff about the Open, his society, and I look at it, and I was always trying to figure, do you want one world? Do you want one world that's broken? Do you want to have just a few people to live at the top of the world and everybody else be subservient? It was never really apparent to anybody, like, exactly what is your end game here, or is this just a rich guy's experiment to see if he can screw with people?
Yeah,
right.
I don't have the answer, and that is definitely one of the issues that's beyond the scope of the book. What exactly he's trying to achieve, but I can say what he has been doing, and I think the fact that he's been doing it and that these things are bad for the American people is enough reason to get the book.
What do you want people to take away from the book?
I want people to know the way that our government really works so that they can get involved and so that we can champion. Ultimately, I want us to return to more of the founders' vision in the way that government works, because right now we have this massive, largely unaccountable administrative state that is that really takes people for a ride. And it enables the phenomenon we talk about as the deep state. And, one of my chapters has an example of, most of the time the Woketopus is in favor of Biden's policies and the Biden administration. But when it came to Israel, and of course, I'm not saying that Biden was the best friend of Israel, but when Biden went up there and said after October 7th, the U.S. will never fail to have your back, immediately there was this backlash among the bureaucrats in his own administration, where they sent things called dissent cables. They tried to speak out. People left, joined activist groups that pressured Biden to crack down on Israeli settlers in the West Bank. And there was, this deep state phenomenon, which I think is a real phenomenon that President Trump is going to be facing. And I think he's being smart about starting to combat it already. But, there was this recent poll that said 64% of Washington, D.C. based federal bureaucrats who voted for Kamala Harris in this last election said they would not follow a lawful Trump order if they thought it was bad policy. That is the deep state in a nutshell, and they're there. And my book is trying to expose where they likely are, who they're likely working with, and why the deep state phenomenon even was a thing under Biden. It's because the bureaucracy thinks they know better than the people's elected representatives, and that mentality has to be rooted out.
You're so right about that. I've said for years, and I continue to say so. Everybody thinks the deep state is some boogeyman that's it's the wizard and it's 3 or 4 people. It is lifetime bureaucrats, and the people that are the president is a renter. He's not staying forever. Even the Congress and senators, they may have a condo, but they're not living forever. Bureaucrats are there forever. They're part of it, and they use their position in such a way that is far more influential. And that deep state is in front of everybody, and they just couch it as, well, it's bureaucracy.
Yeah. No, and they view, and this is the weird thing about talking about the deep state, is that a lot of people think it's one thing. I think it's an isolated phenomenon that, like, a lot of bureaucrats will oppose the people's elected representatives because they think they know better. But and sometimes that forms cabals, sometimes it doesn't. But I think and the sad thing about all of it is that there are people in the federal government who just want to serve the American people. And those civil servants should be honored. The problem is there are a lot of them who also think they know better, and they're going to take the American people for a ride. And, they may not intend to abuse their power, but they are abusing their power. And so some of those people who are, and especially those who do intend to abuse their power, need to be rooted out. The federal government should not be a jobs program for people who are not going to do the work. It should not be a deep state from within to oppose the people's elected representatives either. It should not be an unaccountable bureaucracy. It should be, under the President of the United States, an accountable executive branch that fulfills the laws passed by Congress and that does so in a way that helps the American people. The problem is we have this top-down bureaucratic mentality that also happens to align with woke priorities, where a lot of these bureaucrats think they know, they're the poll also that Neapolitan News puts out. It's this really great poll because it shows the worldview differences between most Americans and the federal bureaucrats. Most Americans say Americans either should have more freedom or have the right amount of freedom. Bureaucrats say Americans have too much freedom. And I think that really reveals the gap. And there are many bureaucrats who do the job well, but my beef isn't with all of them. But there is a huge amount of the federal bureaucracy in D.C. that needs to be rooted out, and we have to clean house. And that's one of the great things that President Trump is trying to do. And I think DOGE is an excellent way of starting the process. I hope my book can be a little bit of a roadmap to undoing all of the damage that these woke activist groups have done.
Last question. I appreciate you coming on. Tyler O'Neill, the Woketopus, the dark money cabal manipulating the federal government. Want to make sure I get it right. What do you think of Elon? Because, look, this is my take, and it's been my take for a while. I get it. It's great that he's exposing some of this insanity. The reality is, if we're serious about addressing our massive deficit and where we're headed, we're going to have to actually talk about the big three. We're going to have to talk about Social Security and military spending and Medicare and all that stuff, which we're not going to do because everybody freaks out about. He's getting the garnish, and he's cutting around certain areas, and he's exposing stuff. But it's interesting, but you and I both know you got to get in there, and no politician alive will say we need to fix Social Security or Medicare or any of that stuff because they know they're done.
Yeah, I mean, the tragic thing about that ultimate deficit problem is that, as you're saying, you can cut around the edges, you can achieve a great deal by restructuring the government, but ultimately, these entitlement programs are too big. They're going to kill us. We have to have a solution to them. And I think that the political will probably will not be there for a while. Unfortunately, and this is something I don't like saying, but from my analysis of history, from my thinking about where our country ultimately is headed, things have to get bad before we are strong enough to change them. And so, God bless President Trump. He's doing a great job right now at rooting out some of the big problems in our government. But these problems are not easily solved in a period of 2 or 4 years. And I think the American people need to know, solving the rot in our government is, I really like DOGE. I think it's going to do a good amount of work, but I don't think it's going to solve all of the problems we're facing by its deadline. And that's just the nature of the beast. Trump wants DOGE to be over and done with by the time of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which I love as an idea, but it's also, in order to achieve the sort of reforms that DOGE is aiming at, I think they just need more time. Elon has been able to do amazing things in short amounts of time. But ultimately, addressing our fiscal crisis is a long-term problem, and I don't know what the full solution is going to be.
His name is Tyler O'Neill. He's senior editor at Daily Signal. And your book, the new book. So you got your other book, which is called Making Hate Pay. Really cool, by the way, which is, we all know that's all about, dividing us because it's good business. But the new book, The Woketopus, the dark money cabal manipulating the federal government. Tell everybody out there where they can get it. And I advise everybody, you guys go out there and get it right now. Yeah, you can find it on Amazon. Amazon is just a great place to buy books. Also, leave a review if you buy it, if you like it. It's available on ebook, paperback, and hardcover. It will be an audiobook coming sometime in April, I believe.
the audio people have already gotten my voice recording it, but it's going to, they still have to package it and get it ready for distribution. I'm really excited about that. You can follow me on X, Tyler2 O'Neill, with just one L. I'm not the Cardinals or Orioles player. I know I look like I'm healthy enough to do that, but not quite.
Yes.
And then you can follow the Daily Signal. I'm also on Truth Social and a few other platforms. You can follow the Daily Signal on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Truth Social, X. We're on all platforms except TikTok and anything else run by the Chinese Communist Party.
There you go. I appreciate you coming on today, man. Thank you so much. Good luck with the book.
Thanks so much for having me, Chad.